Hello, everybody. I'm Kathy Hendrickson from the Business Career Development Office, and I'm excited to have you join us for one of our sessions, Business Career Week. Business Career Week are workshops that students have asked specifically for the topics, and we've partnered with student organizations and employers to help create the content for the sessions. Today's session is Rocking the Case Interview, and there's a very specific reason that I used Rocking the Case Interview, which we will get to. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I give an introduction to the UConn Consulting Group, who not only is sharing the video with other students, but they are here participating with us. They are actually going to share their insight for casing and for framework, for all of the information that students are going to need for understanding what a case interview is. So before I get started, I just want to make some introductions. So Judy Stewart is from our Stanford campus. Judy is a career consultant, and she's the assistant director for employer partnerships, which is critically important. And then we have Sue Landolino, who's joining us from out of state today. She's our career consultant, assistant director for internal relations. And for those of you that are watching this later, Sue, there you are. Sue is our partner on the Hartford campus. So for those of you that are watching this later, knowing that you've got career consultants on all the different campuses that you can reach out to. And then Mia, would you like to introduce your team?
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Mia Langston. Myself, Sasha, and Cassandra are all here on behalf of the UConn Consulting Group. So I don't know, we could all kind of go around and do an intro. Sasha?
Hi everyone, my name is Sasha. I'm a senior management major with a music minor, and I am currently the director of diversity and an associate for the UConn Consulting Group.
Love that music connection. And Cassandra?
Hi there, guys. First off, I just want to say thank you, Kathy, for helping organize all of this today. It's a pleasure to be here and get to kind of reach out to more students on campus. My name's Cassandra Barbino. I am a finance and French dual degree student, and I am a project lead for the UConn Consulting Group this semester.
Outstanding. All right, so we still have some students joining us. I just want to share with everybody that we are recording the video. There is a chat function, so anybody who's on the call can either raise their hand or put questions in the chat function. Judy, I'm going to ask you to kind of keep an eye on the chat function for me, if you would. Excellent. And so rocking the case interview, right? So the reason that I used the term rocking the case interview is because case interviews are very, very specific types of interviews. And there's a cadence that goes along with it, right? A case interview is one of the many types of interviews that students at UConn will experience. They're phone interviews, first round interviews, second round interviews, panel interviews, super day interviews. A case interview is very specific, and it is not a trick. It's not employers trying to trip you up in the middle of an interview. It's really designed for them to understand your thought process and your problem solving and analysis skills. If you think about interviewing as traditional interviews or what we call behavioral, and that's all about the past, right? It's tell me about a time that you showed experience in leadership or teamwork. So you're explaining something that you did in the past. For a case interview, it's very forward thinking, right? The employer is asking you, share your thoughts with me. Tell me how you would work through this business case. And I will tell you that the same way that you would not get behind a car and start driving without practicing, we really want you to know case interviews can be effective, but only if you practice first and if you understand the concept of a case interview. You don't want to find yourself at the first time somebody ever asks you a case interview case question for it to be your first time, right? You don't want to have to lose that opportunity to really show them who you are and what you can do by not being prepared for it. So that's what this session is for. It's to give you an idea what a case interview is like, and then to set some framework for you. So Mia and her team and the consulting team, I'm so thrilled that they're joining us for this because these are your fellow students, right? They're the ones that this is what they do a lot in the meetings that they have, is they are working with alumni and consulting firms to understand the framework for case interviews and how to set up the responses to these questions. And quite often when you talk to students who have done case interviews, they will tell you they do 30 to 40 practice interviews before they ever get into a live interview. So without that sounding intimidating, we're going to share with you resources. You can do these at 2 o'clock in the morning, when Saturday morning when you've had too much coffee. There are resources online through McKinsey, Deloitte. There are hundreds of case interviews you can practice. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what's the structure of it, what does it mean, and what are the simple versions of it, right? There's the more extended version that our team is going to share here, but there could be very simple ones they call back of the envelope, where think about being out to dinner with a client and the client asks you, just a random question and you write it on the back of the envelope and start structuring it through. The very basic of a case interview question could be, how many airplanes are flying over Texas at this exact moment, right? And nobody's looking for a number. They're not looking for you to stop quickly and go 4,952, no, 53. It's not about the answer as it is the structure, right? So when you get a question like that, kind of an unknowable, take a step back and walk the interviewer through the process of what you would do to solve that question, right? So Mia, did you want to kick us off? I'll let you guys take the structure here, but please, for everybody who's on here, we really want this to be interactive. Hey, Mick. We want this to be interactive, and that sometimes that's tough knowing that it's going to be pre-recorded for later. But what I'm inviting everybody who's watching this at any point in time is to reach out to the Business Career Center. And, I think we've got some connections here with the UConn Consulting Club too. Don't go into it alone, right? So take the time, use the resources that you have to get some insight into this. So would you like to kick us off, Mia?
Sure, sounds good. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes. Yep,
Okay,
there should
awesome.
be a link at the bottom.
Okay, so I think we're just gonna first go through, we do like a boot camp for our recruitment process, and we talk about like how to do casing. So, this might be a great way to just kind of kick it off and just talk about some of the basics of casing.
Hang on one second. I just got to tell Sue. Sue, we can see you doing your laundry. This is why I love these kind of sessions. This is very fun. Okay.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
We can.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we'll just be running through a couple case interview basics. So here's just kind of the overall like interview stages for casing. So this is just kind of what we talk about during our boot camp, as I mentioned. So and then my team like jump in like whenever you want to, but kind of basically how it starts for anyone who's not familiar with cases, you usually have like some type of prompt that has some information about the business, or we usually, refer to them as the client. There's usually some key metrics in there, and then like an objective that you have to solve. So that's kind of the first thing you do, is you want to, be listening to what your interviewer is presenting and take notes, and make sure just to kind of take notes on like the key information, because there is going to be like a lot of different terms in there. And then you can just move on to kind of clarifying the question of, why this is being asked and like what the objective is, and then also like what's defined as success for the client, whether that's, for example, if it's like profitability or something, maybe it's like a certain revenue per year or something. So kind of clarifying that for yourself is really important, because you don't want to like start a framework on the wrong assumptions. And then you can just go into a framework, and I'll actually turn this over to Cassandra, because I feel like you have a really good way of like explaining frameworking.
Thanks, Mia. So, yeah, a framework is basically a guide for you to use to navigate this sort of interview. So, the problem that you're going to be given at the beginning is going to be very broad. It's going to seem like, how could I possibly answer this? So, you're going to want to break it down into a few different components so you have an idea of where to start. So, let's say there's a simple question like, you're looking at a business and they're asking you, why is profitability declining? So you would want to kind of have that as your top bucket. And then you would move down into a few categories underneath. Let's say if you're looking at profitability, is this a problem with revenue or is this a problem with costs? And that's a great way to kind of structure it so you can look into one department. And then how I like to use my framework, I use it as sort of a checklist. If you can kind of say to your interviewer, let's start looking at revenue, and then you quickly realize after a few questions that that's not the problem, you know that you've thoroughly investigated it, and you can kind of conclude that you need to look more into the cost structure and find what's wrong there that's causing this decline in profitability. So it's really more for you to move throughout the interview in a way that's effective and organized and shows that you are thinking of all the options and carefully delving into the ones that are going to be the most productive for the case. And then, Mia, I know you were just on the other slide. We can kind of touch on that here, I think. And feel free to jump in about MISI. So MISI stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, kind of a mouthful. But could you go to the next slide real quick? Thank you. So when you're building out your framework, you want to show that you are being mutually exclusive. So there's no overlap between your categories. So when looking at profitability, there's not going to be any overlap between revenue and costs. Those are distinct categories. But you also want to show that you are being collectively exhaustive. So you're including every single option that there could be. When you're looking at revenue, there's nothing really that's going to fall outside of revenue or costs. So this just shows to your interviewer that you conceptually understand what's going on and you know all of the bases that you need to touch on. And it shows that you have clarity of thought when you're going through the case. And that's really what they want to see. They want to see that you're organized, you can think through a problem efficiently, and you can kind of figure out where the problem lies. So I'll turn it back to you, Mia or Sasha, whoever wants to kind of pick up for the next part.
And I'm just going to jump in here for a second to say that I already love the way that you're presenting this. And for students that may have missed that very first part that Mia said is take notes and ask questions, right? All of this is designed to be a process. So what we're going to see here on the screen is the way you work through that process. But for those of you who haven't done it before, try not to get too overwhelmed because no one's going to throw this at you and tell you within 2 seconds you need an answer, right? So listening to the talent that we have here right now is knowing this is how you're setting up the structure. So that's how you're gonna work through it. And asking clarifying questions is absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, definitely to that point. I think there's no such thing as talking too much in a case interview or asking too many questions. You want to show your interviewer that you understand what's going on, and you can do that by asking good questions and thinking about what's going to drive the case forward. So, what I always think about when I'm doing my framework, that's like your starting steps, and you want to kind of drive the interviewer forward. That's what takes a case from being good to being great, is when you can show some sort of direction and push the interviewer where you want to explore new ideas and find new information.
And Cassandra, what do you think about the fact that, the feedback that you're getting from the interview as you go along, right? So being able to kind of take that feedback and pivot a little bit. Do you think that's something that you've seen success with?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that's very pertinent to finding the route that's going to give you the most success. And they want to usually they'll have different exhibits or information that's laid out in the case that you need to kind of discover through asking questions and finding your own answers. And then they'll reveal this extra information to you. So maybe you'll discover that, oh, we have a problem with costs. And they'll say, that's great. Here's a chart showing the different cost structure of the company. And that's how you kind of know you're going in the right direction. Not that there is one clear right direction in any case interview, but there is usually a kind of laid out path that you want to follow along to get the information you need to give the best recommendation possible. So you will definitely want to kind of look to them for guidance, but also push them in the right direction so that they can give you that information, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, because if you think about this as less of an interview once you get to the case part and more of a client meeting, right? Your mind shifts from I'm trying to do everything perfect for this interview to I'm really walking through the process of this with the client. What would I want them to know, and what would I really want to be talking with them about? I love this. MECE.
Yeah, for sure. And I always just like some random advice. I always feel like people get very caught up in, oh, I need to have my defined buckets. I need to explore these categories. But I like to kind of take a step back and think about it more like a story and a real life problem. If this was something that was happening in real life, what would you want to know? What would be important to kind of figure out the root of the problem? And that's usually where you're going to find the most success.
Beautiful.
Mia, did you want to go back to the overview of how to work through a case?
Yep, here it is. I don't know, Sasha, did you want to finish off this slide?
Sure. So yeah, thank you, Mia and Cassandra. I am going to go over the investigation and the conclusion part of the case. I know this is a lot of information. I hope it isn't too overwhelming, and that the slide sort of helps lay everything out in a cohesive way. So once you have your framework built out, you want to refer to it throughout the entire case, because it is the central thing that's going to be guiding what questions you ask, what actions you take, what recommendations you're going to give. So you want it to be really central to everything that you're doing. While you're investigating, you can start asking specific questions for each bucket in your framework. So going back to a profitability example, you can ask, do we have any information on the company's revenue? And here are X, Y, and Z ways that maybe this company is making that revenue. Do we have any information on that? And if the interviewer says no, then you know that the case isn't guided by the revenue. And then you want to look over at your other bucket, which would be cost, and ask, do we have information on that? And if they do, then that means that that's the direction that you want to go in, and you want to investigate that even further. So you might have hypothesized that another bucket was going to be the main one to investigate, but it's okay if your hypothesis is wrong and you end up having to go into a different direction, because as we talked about, you really want to play off of the interviewer and what they're saying to you and how they're reacting to your questions. So let them sort of guide the direction that you go in. So after you ask all of your specific quantitative questions, you want to sort of start actually figuring out what the answer is to the case. So in profitability, that may be calculating the revenue and cost, or the break-even point, or something along those lines. In other cases, it might be something like market sizing, where you're trying to assume the size of a market for a new product, or market entry, where a company is looking to expand and they're trying to see if it's the right decision or not. And so you have to give them the yes or no answer. So this is really where that part comes in. And I want to emphasize that, as Kathy said, it's not necessarily about the accuracy, although accuracy helps. It's really about the process of how you get there. And lastly is your conclusion. So your conclusion should be about 1 to 2 minutes total. And this is really where you sum up the entire case. So you want to summarize the prompt that was given to you and highlighting key information. You want to emphasize your framework and the process that you followed. And then ultimately, you want to give 2 to 3 recommendations to the client of how they can address their objectives. And then you want to state a couple of risks that go along with those recommendations as well, because of course, with any action that a company takes, there are going to be negatives or risks that need to be addressed. And lastly, you want to offer next steps to follow. And this is really where your creativity can come in as well. I really like to tie in things like social media or influencer marketing into my recommendations sometimes if it's applicable to the case, because that demonstrates an understanding beyond what is given to you. And that's always a plus. So Mia and Cassandra, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add, but I think that summarizes investigation and conclusion.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. Just to kind of like recap this slide, because I feel like it is a lot and there's a lot of different facets to each of these categories. But basically, what happens in a case interview is the interviewer will present you a problem. It's a prompt of a few sentences giving you a client, which is usually a company, and they have some sort of problem. So you're going to sit down for a few minutes and figure out, what are they really asking me? And ask good questions about, what is this company? Who are they? What do they do? Why do they want to solve this problem? What's my objective? And how will I know that I have solved this case? So then building out your framework, figuring out the different components of how you're going to go about solving this problem, investigating all of those different components, and then coming to a conclusion where you will give them a recommendation. It says pyramid principle on here. I just want to touch on what that is. So that's kind of like starting with your recommendation up at the front, the most important information, and then building out underneath it in a pyramid, the reasons why, what you think the risks are to your recommendation, and what information you would want to know for next steps moving forward.
I'd also like to highlight that this slide, it only encapsulates part of what we're looking at when we are, for example, when the consulting group is interviewing. We look at a few different things. I would say communication, process, and accuracy are the three things that would highlight what we look for, as well as, we're trying to emulate what real consulting firms do. So you can assume that this is also what they are looking for. So first is communication, and just the way that you're presenting yourself, the way you present the information, and your professionalism. Secondly is the process. So looking at your business acumen, your logic, your problem solving abilities, your creativity, those types of intangible things. And lastly would be accuracy. So how well can you answer the question, and is it correct? Although we definitely emphasize communication and process over accuracy.
I think those are really important points. And one of the things that I'd like to recommend to students who are thinking about case interviews is, a lot of times it's what's missing, right? So when you first look at something, it's okay for you to say, okay, here's the data that I see, but put that thought process into place where you're automatically thinking, okay, what's actually missing? Because, when you think about the fact that, like Cassandra was telling you, they give you details, and they might be not hiding, but they might be holding back some of those resources, waiting for you to ask those really interesting questions. And you will find that when you first get the problem, you might freeze up a little bit thinking, this is, I've got to do this right. Okay. So giving yourself permission to say, well, what am I missing? What's not here yet? Starts a real creative process in your mind. It stops the block that you go into, like that freeze mode, because when you say what's missing, you're not expecting anything from yourself. You're looking at the case critically and saying, here's the data. This is what they're telling me about, the industry, maybe it's a sports industry, but boy, seems like they're missing a whole part of this conversation. And when you start to raise those questions, that's when you can get good information. And the idea that Sasha was talking about, communication, it's both ways, right? It's the listening and the discussing. And you can show confidence even if you're not completely sure where you're going with it, right? It's okay to be confident in saying, well, these are the steps that I'm going to, and then be prepared for them to just say no. You know, sometimes they'll just stop you dead in your tracks and go, no. And they're not trying to be mean, right? But they may want you to be able to justify what you're doing, right? Yeah. Are you guys waving or asking? Yeah. Do you want to join in?
Oh, sorry. I just was saying in the chat that I have to run to class, so I was just waving goodbye.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Sasha. We appreciate you being here.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay. So the idea of being able to discuss your thought process, right? So, I mean, you've got the conclusion here, the risks and next steps. Be prepared for questions. And the questions are not designed to derail you, but they're designed to maybe help you think a little more critically and also to show that confidence.
Yeah, precisely, Kathleen. And adding on to that, just when you get stuck or maybe freeze up or end up in that situation where you feel really lost, don't feel like the case is over, because sometimes what you can show is that you may get into a sticky situation and not know where to go next. But that's the great thing about case interviews, is that it measures a lot more than your ability to case. It measures your determination and your perseverance in hard situations and being able to say, I'm not really sure where to go with this. Let me think of ways that I can kind of pivot out of this little hole that you may have gotten yourself into. So it really just shows a lot about you as a person as well. So don't ever feel like you've messed up too bad or you're beyond help. You're always in a position to show yourself admirably to your interviewer.
That's excellent advice. Mia, were you going to say something?
Yes, just to that point, I think that that also highlights the importance of having a really strong framework and making sure that it is exhaustive, because if you do get stuck, and I've definitely been there before, um, going back to your framework can be a really, nice tool. You can kind of look at exactly like what you've already assessed, and then if there's holes in that, maybe that's somewhere you go next. But definitely keeping that open line of communication with your interviewer, just because I think um, you do need to think about it a little bit more as a conversation, I would say. You don't want them to feel like you're just like, sitting there with your head down, like trying to crunch these numbers or anything. Because like you kind of think of them like almost as a client, right? You're trying to help them to figure out the issues, you know, in this prompt. And sometimes, honestly, that can really make the difference. And because they do, at the end of the day, they have the information. You just need to ask the right questions and they can give it to you and kind of help lead you to that potential solution.
Right. And consultancy is where all of the case interviews started, right? Management consultant, that industry started case interviews, but they are used across industry now. There are finance firms that use them, marketing firms, and it's an amazing way to highlight a certain skill set that you have. Like if if there's a student who's, going on a marketing interview and they get a case interview question about how to launch a new product, in a new area, and the student happens to be really interested in sustainability, that internal insight that the student has can come out in the case study. So you really want to give yourself that permission to be able to insert yourself into the case, right? To be a part of the case and ask those questions. And you may bring up a topic that they've never heard of before because everybody's coming at it with a different lens. So Mia, tell me again, what are you, a senior?
Oh, yeah, I kind of forgot to introduce myself at the beginning, but I'm a junior,
You're a junior.
currently. Yes.
Okay. And what is your major?
I'm a dual degree in chemical engineering and French.
Okay.
Um, so actually, just to that point that you just made about cases being kind of universal. So I was applying for an R&D position at Unilever, and I had like a bunch of cases actually for the first round. So I'm starting to see it even in engineering. So these skills are so transferable. So just wanted to make that point.
And how did you get started doing the case interviews and the practices?
Yeah, so when I first started recruiting for UCG, you obviously do this boot camp, and this is kind of like the first step. But then there's also so many resources online. So I would even like look up just like practice cases I think Case in Point is a really good resource. I would go through a lot of different examples and just try to framework them out because those are ones that are maybe like a little bit more advanced. Um, we also for UCG we do offer like office hours um, where we have casing books that will help um, you know applicants with casing, and then also like you can literally like look up anything on YouTube really. Like I remember watching a bunch of like mock cases for like McKinsey or BCG,
Right.
and these are like really advanced professionals, but it's just really interesting to see how they kind of dissect the case. So I'd learned a lot from that.
And Mia, would you just put into the chat what you just mentioned about the consulting club, how students would be able to reach out if they wanted to?
Yeah, sure.
And then if you do you still have slides that you wanted to use?
I think
Okay.
we do, yes.
Okay. At the end of this, I am going to show some resources that students could use. So we'll circle back to that. I'll let you guys go.
Yeah, Mia, do you want me to take this?
Yeah, sure.
So we would love a little bit of interaction on this, guys. So feel free to jump in, say it in the chat, or just unmute your mic. But these are just some examples of things that are or are not MECE. So remember, MECE is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So it covers everything with no overlap. So does anyone want to jump in and say whether this first group of age groups is MECE?
I had no idea.
Yeah. So this first example is a great example of something that is definitely Macy because there's no age that could fall outside of one of these categories, right? You're either 0 to 61 plus. There's nothing that's going to not be covered there. And then there's also no overlap between the groups. So 0 to 30 does not overlap with 31 to 60, does not overlap with 61 plus. So you know that you covered everything and you're not overlapping. And then for the second example, if anyone wants to hop in, they can, or I can explain it.
Why don't you go ahead and explain it?
Yeah, for sure. So this one shows birthplace, and you have California, Asian, Europe, German. So this is obviously not MECE because they're completely different categories, right? You have German is a nationality. It's not even really like a place, and it's also in Europe, so there's an overlap there. And then there's entire continents that aren't covered here, so you know that it's not covering all of the different categories. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. This is a smaller exercise, obviously, than would be in a real case, but it's just a good example to kind of help you understand MECE and what it really means.
So tell me something, is MECE, and this is something that I'm learning right now, is that a term that they use in case interviews?
Yeah, I believe it's a term that originated with the Boston Consulting Group, just to kind
Okay.
of cover all of the bases in a case. And it's a really good concept to go by. And it's something that, especially within consulting firms, they'll recognize if you're thinking about that or not. And
Mhm.
they're kind of looking for it outside of consulting. It may not be this specific, but it's still just a good general principle to abide by.
Which is why it's so wonderful and important to do this kind of prep work, right? Because when I look at that screen, thank heavens I'm not doing the case interview for myself, right? But I will do the exact same thing I just told students not to do. I looked at that and went, don't know. Your brain just freezes up, and doing that kind of practicing and learning the nomenclature, like the terms that are generally used, can make a huge difference. And this is we're 36 minutes into like a prep session here for students who may not have ever done anything with case interviews, and they're already going to be walking away with an understanding of why it's important to understand the framework and why it's important to know some of the language, right? So even if you're not good at it, just recognizing, the terms. Nice example.
Oh, thank you. Mia, do you want to add anything or go on to another slide?
I don't think I have anything to add, so we can just move on. Oh, wait, I think, one second. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we just wanted to quickly go over sort of the four main types of cases that you might encounter during a case interview. So typically you might see, as we've kind of talked about, the profitability case. Then you might have market sizing, market entry, and then M&A, so mergers and acquisitions. So typically, they're not really exclusive in the sense that if you have a case, you could have something along the lines of like, entering a market. So you'd have market sizing first, and then you might have to figure out profitability. So I wouldn't think of these as like completely exclusive, but these are just kind of the categories that we like to think of the cases as. So like you might have one that like kind of mainly focuses on like profitability, but you might have like a little bit of something else kind of mixed in there, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Is there anything you want to add with that, Cassandra?
Yeah, just to kind of briefly touch on some of these. So, a profitability case, to kind of explain what each of these are, that would be sort of like the question we said earlier, like figuring out why profits are declining or if this new venture is going to be profitable. So, looking at the revenues and costs and figuring that out for the client. Market sizing is actually kind of specific. You want to be given a situation and be able to find the revenue spent per year in a certain area on a certain product. So, how you would go about that is finding the number of something that's sold in the United States every year. Let's say it's toothbrushes. That's what your client wants to know about. So, finding the number of toothbrushes sold times the cost per toothbrush to the customer, and then finding that as the total revenue per year is usually what they're looking for. And then market entry is usually a should we, shouldn't we type of question. If they want to enter a new market, let's say this toothbrush company wants to start a dental floss line. Is that something they should do?
Or
And then-
bubblegum line.
Exactly. And then mergers and acquisitions is less common at lower level roles, but more common the higher and more prestigious the firms get. And being able to advise on, is this merger acquisition, so two companies coming together, a good idea or not? If that just kind of explains all of them. Any questions on that for anyone? Anything you want to add, Mia?
No, I think you did a great job explaining all those.
Is there any questions from my team on here on ways to clarify, or I know that we're all like learning more just between ourselves. Nope. Okay, we're good.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. Okay, so here's just a quick profitability tree. So this is typically how we would like framework a profitability case. You have revenue and costs, and then you could break down your revenue into price and volume, and then your costs into fixed and variable costs. So this is like very simple, but just something really to keep in the back of your mind, because like this is kind of like low-hanging fruit per se, I would, in a case. So this is just a great, really simple framework.
That makes a lot of sense. Mental math.
So when you're going through a case, they're usually going to throw some numbers at you. And something that's very specific for almost every firm across the board is that you will not have a calculator. They want to see that you can do this sort of mental math, and you'll usually have scratch paper and a pencil, but that's about it. So it's important to kind of know what to expect. So there's a few basic formulas that you can memorize, or a lot of them are pretty intuitive, like profit is revenue minus cost, or revenue is volume times price. But if you don't have a strong business background, let's say you're an engineering and French major like Mia, it might serve you well to kind of study up on a few of these things. And a lot of resources will point out these basics. You definitely don't have to be some sort of like business whiz, but knowing the basics will help you a lot in this sort of situation. And then just tips and tricks to like do the math in your head. There's all sorts of little things like, taking out zeros and then adding them back in at the end. You can always round numbers. I always say like the population of the United States is about 300 million. There's no need to kind of scrutinize those numbers and do the tiny little details. That's not what they're looking for. They want to see that you're reasoning effectively. And my biggest tip for doing math during an interview is to talk the interviewer through it. There's nothing worse than you going completely silent and trying to do the math and messing it up and getting a number that makes no sense. And if you don't ask for the feedback from the interviewer, they're not going to give it to you. So being able to kind of bounce your ideas off of them and at least show them where you're at. That way, let's say you forget to add your zeros back at the end, so your number's way, way smaller than it's supposed to be. At least they can see that and know where you got the number. And then if your final recommendation is based off of that number, they can reevaluate what your ending answer should be and give you more credit for your ideas, which is at the end of the day, really what you want them to see, that you can solve problems and use logic effectively. And then don't be afraid to like make small errors and everything. Like no one's perfect at math. Like you're going to make mistakes sometimes. As long as you're organized and walk them through the process, that's really where you're going to get the most kind of points in their book.
Excellent. That's great. And then knowing also that you have time to do this too, right? So I think we mentioned in the beginning that this is, it can be anywhere from 15 minutes to like 45 minutes where they're giving you the information. There are times when you might be doing this in a group as well, right? So you might be in a group interview where you're asked to work with others and they want to see, how do you do this process with others? So the case interview, these are outstanding examples and an understanding of really what they're looking for. And then putting it in the bigger picture of this is one of maybe 4 or 5 interviews you're going to be having with this company, right? So there's always that opportunity to say, here's what I'm doing and walk them through the process. And by the time they realize that you're talking it through with them, I think to the point of, both of you, that they are going to engage, right? They're not going to give you the answer. They're not going to like tell you what you need to be doing for next steps, but the most really good interviewers will recognize if you're struggling on something small. And to Cassandra's point, if you start talking it through, say, this is the part that I'm working on and I'm getting a little stuck on this, so I'm going to go in this direction. Give them the chance to absolutely help.
Absolutely. The interviewer is honestly on your side.
Yeah.
Like, I know I don't want to sit there and watch someone struggle because they made a small math error. Like, that's not what they're looking for. They want you to do well. They want you to be able to showcase that creativity and be able to really show them who you are as a person when you're looking at a project like this.
Right. And I will tell you, if you think about the fact that, there might be, 7 people interviewing for this same position who are working through the same case at different times, at the end of the day, it still comes into play as to who you are as a person, right? You might nail that case interview, but the way that you present it and your interaction may not be as positive as somebody else who was struggling a little bit more with it, but was engaging and thoughtful and used, those conversational skills to really connect with the person. So the case is part of it, and still being true to yourself and recognizing that it's a conversation is a big part of it as well.
For
You're
sure.
both amazing at this. Now, there's a couple things that I just want to share, but I don't want to miss anything that you're going through.
I think we have like one more slide, right, Mia? We can wrap it up super quick. I want to make sure we get
No,
to.
I'm not rushing you. I just want to make sure that I'm also not keeping you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I want to make sure we see your resources as well, too. I'm curious.
Okay.
Okay, I think we might have like, oh wait, this is a real case. So let me just check. This is, Cassandra, did you do boot camp? Because I wasn't at boot camp this year, so I don't know if there's a bunch of other slides we have
Yeah,
to do.
we can like skip through a few of them to kind of get to like the end. We could talk about
Okay.
like the example of this if you want me to grab this one.
I can actually talk about this one, then if you want to hop on.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but basically this is a great example of what market sizing would look like in a real case. So of course it's going to be like more complex, but so imagine this is like your case prompt. So basically you'd have some type of corporation that's selling, in this case, smartphone cases, and they want us to gauge how big the total market is. So here's just some examples of some clarifying questions that you might want to ask. I think a good one to start off with is just to figure out like what market you're focusing on. Usually it's going to be US, but sometimes there might be like something really weird and specific. So definitely clarify that. Um, and then just kind of going through like just basically the idea I think with market sizing is just trying to come up with different parameters and trying to figure out how that market is segmented. So like in this case, we're just looking at like Galaxy and iPhones, and only like the cheap plastic kinds. So you can kind of walk your interviewer through like different sort of factors, I guess, you would think would help to split up this market. So in this case, it's the type of phone, it's the ones that have cases, and then at the end we have the cost like Cassandra talked about, because you want that revenue value at the end.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know, Cassandra, if you have anything else to add.
The only thing I have to add is that it's really not about the end number at all. I'm pretty sure that number there at the end is not even actually correct. It's just kind of based off of our math here on the slide. We're not looking for you to say it's $675 million in revenue per year. We're looking for those assumptions like, oh, I think 80% of people use smartphones. I think 50% of those people have cases, and be able to say, oh, in my experience, I think it would be replaced every 2 years, and drawing off of that logic and making assumptions that make sense.
That's a great example of market sizing because it's very relatable, right? It's not widgets or something that they're doing up at the Space Center.
Yeah, exactly. So just like one like tip that I found was personally like really helpful, because sometimes you do, have cases where you have something kind of like unrelatable, and it's hard to like kind of picture like what like parameters you might want to think about to narrow down that market. If you go through a bunch of examples and kind of come up with like a list that you can kind of default to, like
Mhm.
for mine, I would always say like maybe it has something to do with like the households, the number of households, or economic class, or like age. So just kind of having that list ahead of time. So if you get stuck during the case, you can refer back to that and just kind of go through those easy, quick ones like right up front and see if they might apply to this example.
Right. Yeah, it's like having your toolkit, right? So that's where the prep work is so vitally important.
Exactly. I think this might be the last slide. Let me just, yeah, these are just like, I think more examples of things that we went over previously.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's so many resources out there where you can kind of practice this. And
Mhm.
like Kathy mentioned earlier, it's not always going to be a full case. You might have something like how many tennis balls can fit in an airplane, or something really random like that, where this
Right.
kind of logic is still applicable, being able to framework it and use what you know to your advantage. Because
Mhm.
obviously, no one's going to know how to calculate that or how many planes are flying over Texas. But to be able
Right.
to say, in my experience, I think that, on average, a plane has 2 rows with 2 seats per row, and all of that sort of stuff. And being able to show that you're thinking about it in a structured way is really what they're looking for.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, we use the example all the time, like how many baseballs does it take to fill Fenway Park, and the first thing is, if you explain to them, well, this is how I would approach the question, but then asking those clarifying questions. Well, are there any seats in the park? Are there any people in the park? Did it snow recently? So are we building on top of snow? And once you start like freeing your mind up to ask those questions, you get so much more creative, right? Because then you can really start thinking, oh, this is, there's a lot more that I don't know. And then that starts the whole process. So it's just the simple version of like some of these cases that you would be doing. But it's really important to give yourself that relatable thought process.
Absolutely. And I would also add the most memorable cases aren't the ones where you do everything perfectly correct. It's the
Mm,
people who are going to be creative and showcase their personal experiences and knowledge and come up with an answer that's not necessarily conventional, but it's smart, it's unique, it's interesting, and it's going to catch the interviewer's attention.
Yeah, exactly, to the point of if everybody answered the case interview exactly the same way, where's the creativity, right? How do they know how to decide who the person is that they want to sit next to them, right? And do this consulting work with them without having that insight. So that creativity makes all the difference. And also, sometimes the best moments are when you fail at something, right? When something goes horribly wrong and it's your reaction to it, and that's where our sense of humor and empathy comes in. So that's important for students to be able to remember that it's not about perfection. Sometimes the most memorable thing is when somebody just like epically failed at the very last second and then went, wait, no, then that's human. That happens. All right. So both of you, outstanding information that you shared with us. And I really appreciate the information that you put in the chat too. I think it's beautiful for students to know that the Yukon Consulting Group does, this type of work for fellow students, right? So it's not just about landing the top job at the best, consulting firm out there. It's also the level of support that you're doing for your fellow students is really something that I am very proud to be able to tell other students about what you're doing and appreciate everything that you've shared today. So the couple things that I just wanted to share, and this is the way the world works. It's kind of beautiful. Today, when I was prepping for this session, I got an email from McKinsey, from an alum who just graduated, Kelly Finn, who was reaching out to say, hey, we want, at McKinsey, we want to start engaging Yukon students. We want to get more Yukon students into the interview process. So our office will be sending out an email, and hopefully people still read email. Judy will throw it into Instagram and we'll market the heck out of it. But McKinsey is inviting students to complete a survey, not a survey, a form where they say what they're looking for, what their major is, and like in some ways, like what geographic area as well. And then coming from that, there will be invitations to different sessions that they're hosting. There will be invitations to when the interview process starts to open up. So this is a consulting firm that recognizes the value of Yukon students across all majors, and understanding that they really want that type of talent at their company. So, but that just happened today, right? I was like, wait, like you're kind of like looking around going, did that really just naturally happen today? And it did, right? So Yukon students are really, you've all got your name out there, right? The more that your club and the students that are landing roles at consulting firms and other type of jobs, the more you do it, the more you're bringing back for other students. So there is one, I'll just share like one resource that I think it's a really interesting way for students to get some kind of experience. So let's see, Mia, if you could stop sharing for a moment. Okay. And then while I'm flipping over, if my team has anything, Mick, Judy, Sue, if there's anything that you want to ask about at the moment while I flip over to this.
Personally, I think it's best if I stay off camera. For those of you who don't know, my keyboard was stuck, and so it was opening my camera. But anyway, long story short, these are all the things that happen during a live presentation. So take it away, Kathy.
Right. And that's what we were saying. Like it's the memorable stuff, right? So I mean, I'm going to remember that Sue helped me to like kind of think about what I was doing because I had a minute or two of just levity, and I think that's beautiful. So the resource that I want to share, first of all, we talked a lot about McKinsey, right? So for those students that are watching this that are really feeling a little intimidated, even with the beautiful breakdown, McKinsey wants you to succeed. So they actually have sample case interviews that you can click on. Let me get to where they are because I just went past them. Okay, practice case tests. These are real questions that they're asking students in their interview process. And you can click on anyone that feels relevant, right? So this electrolyte, you know, the sports flavored drink, if you click on it, it's not just a description of it, right? So what it does is, here's the question, but here's what I love. Here's the question, and then here's an answer. So a lot to what Cassandra and Mia did was share here's some insight into the case interviews. Let's see. Can everybody see the question interview? Did it flip over? Mia, what can you see on your screen? Oh, I'm showing the PowerPoint.
I just see the resource slide.
Okay. All right, let's try this. Let me do this. How about that? Can you see the question? Okay. So yeah, back to, and thank you for letting me know that, right? So things go wrong. So electrolyte, it's a sample case. When you look at it, you're going to read the question. But what I was saying, the thing that I think is beautiful is that they don't just give you the question and some hints. They give you a real answer. So you can start to get the idea of, oh, this is the kind of language that they're looking for, right? That's one of the resources that you can use. But here at UConn, we have a new resource that I think is really very interesting. And so I'm going to pop over, and I know it'll take a second for this to flip over. So let me stop sharing that one and share the new one. Okay, can you see something called Forage? Okay, so Forage it's listed on the Center for Career Development's website under experiential learning and micro internships. But what it is it's an opportunity for students to do a small case with an actual company, and it's real work, right? So if you clicked here, you just fill it out. You can do a project that lasts 2 hours. Just skip past this. I'm going to go back to this. It's gonna ask you to sign up, but you would have to do that later. All right, so let me see. All right, so can you still see where it says like Lyft and Infosys, Red Bull? All right, so if you look at the Red Bull one, 2 to 3 hours. So what it is that there's no interview, you don't get paid for this, but it's an actual live project, right? So you click on this, you could put the 2 to 3 hours in, and the amazing part is you get feedback from the company. So you put in the amount of work that you want, you get the feedback from the company, and you are then put into a bucket of people. So if you are trying to work for Red Bull, or you're trying to work for another company and you want the chance to get the experience of working with some of them, Accenture has one on here, Citi, BCG. This is, you know, it's a time commitment. But during winter break, during, you know, when you're not sitting on the beach for spring break, you know, there's things that you can do. But this is a way that you can start getting some experience on some of this and actually connecting with live companies, because this isn't a test where you have to do everything perfectly. It's an opportunity for companies get a huge bonus out of this, right? They're getting to see all this top talent from students, but it also gives you that one-to-one work and research with the company, which is similar to some of the cases that you would be doing. So that's a brand new one. And actually, I'll just put that, I'm going to put the link in the chat here. Copy this. It's an interesting kind of a name. Let's see. Okay, so there's that resource. There's the McKinsey, Deloitte has it, PwC, they all have these practice interviews. And I know you can do like 1,000 practice case interviews, but I'm going to suggest for students who really aren't familiar with it yet to use the resources from the companies that recruit here. Right. So we know that you're getting good insight from companies that we're familiar with, but I love the ones that you put in there, Mia, as well. The case books and those are ones that have been vetted by you. So I think that's really important for students to be able to see the different opportunities there. So you guys, and it's 7:02 and I always talk too long. You did an amazing job. We appreciate this. This will be hosted on our YouTube. So anytime that you want to use it for a future presentation, student groups that want to use it, if you want to use it for an interview to show the employers that you already know how to rock a case interview because you're teaching it, it's just one more way that we're so impressed by everything that you're doing. Any last minute thoughts or questions from anybody?
I just want to say thank you so much, Kathy. This was a wonderful experience, and I'm so glad that we got to kind of share some of the stuff that we do, and hopefully it's helpful for everyone out there.
Thank you. And I know that the students, I think there's another side to UConn Consulting that students are getting to see here because, people tend to get a little insulated in their own groups, but the amount of work that you're sharing and the resources that you're sharing with all of the other ones is quite lovely. Hi, Mick. Are you just saying hello?
Hello, everyone. Great insight, great presentation. I have to say, I really enjoyed it just to kind of see the framework and how you guys really presented the PowerPoint presentation. Really great insight.
All right, I am going to stop recording, and I know that hopefully you guys see, stop recording.